Hello, artists and animators. How important is practice to the craft of animation? In this panel discussion, we invited four industry artists with experience as instructors or mentors to talk about their experiences practicing their crafts. Topics include the suggestions for practicing skills related to storyboarding, rigging, or animation, how to get the most out of feedback, and critiques, as well as common misconceptions about the practice. So, Sydney, Felipe, Eden and Lindsay, welcome to the live stream.
Woo,
Hi.
hey.
So
Hello.
let's get this started with some quick introductions. Please introduce yourself with your name and your path to your current role in animation. Sydney, let's start with you.
Hi, I'm Sydney Gale. I graduated with a BFA in animation in 2020. Pretty much right out of college, I started doing tiny freelance animation related work, along with like a lot of personal work, just animating whatever my heart desired and drawing whatever my heart desired. Um, and that led to a lot of updating my demo reel over and over and over again until I finally landed a test with Spindle Horse. There, I worked on the season one finale of Has Been Hotel, and then went on to work on season two of Hell of a Boss. I'm still currently working at Spindle, but I've also done some work with some smaller indie productions like Bleeding Heart by Ali Vandeman and Enceladus 5. Um, Check it out on TikTok if that's still a thing. Um, and then I'm also currently working on some upcoming projects with What Pumpkin Games and Jellybox Studios.
So I love that you're working on a lot of projects with indie studios. What has that experience been like?
It's been really great. It's kind of my only experience, like other than like one-on-one client-based work. I guess Spindle is like a pretty big indie studio, kind of a oxymoron indie studio, but they're like a more substantial indie project, self-funded project. So that's probably kind of similar to working at like one of the bigger, more established studios, like the legacy, studios. But yeah, like my only experience has been uh, indie things so far. So it's been really great working full remote, but still having an opportunity to like talk with all my coworkers through like Discord, email. Yeah.
Felipe, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in animation?
Cool. Yes. Yeah. I'm Felipe. I joined the animation industry in Brazil back in 2010, and for a long time I've been doing preschool type of TV shows, a few feature films here and there. I moved to Vancouver in 2016, working the My Little Pony, the movie, working Carmen San Diego season one and two. Uh, I was an animation supervisor in the most recent few Peanut shorts for Apple Plus, and since then I've shifted my whole working dynamic to be a full-time freelance in the traditional animation side of the industry. I work in stuff like Disenchanted, the animation section of the movie. I worked on the yet to be released in North America, The Day the Earth Blew Up, the Looney Tunes movie. So I'm excited to see that one when it comes out. Uh, and yeah, I've been on in the whole thing for like around like 15 years now, and still feels like I just joined. Every time I join a new project, I'm nervous as hell, and just trying to do my best one day at a time.
Was it like intimidating or scary to go from like a career in the sort of cutout animation industry to doing freelance on traditional animated projects?
Oh, it was. Yeah, I feel like you always have that self doubt of this seems like way less constant than just like being working for a studio for like longer contracts, but he also opened like so many different doors that it kind of like balances out a little bit, uh, and building relationships with like good studios, meeting a lot more new artists and being involved with like different teams every 2 or 3 weeks is also very exciting. You know, you just like kind of like opens up the amount of new friends you make, and new types of projects that you get to touch a little bit. So yeah, it was scary. I would say it's still a bit scary because, you know, as we know, the industry also just went through like a hurricane recently. But yeah, it's equally exciting, I would say.
Yeah. Eden, can you talk a little bit about yourself and your origin story in animation?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm Eden Tim. I'm from Saskatchewan. I've been working in the animation industry in British Columbia since 2012. I started as a 3D animator, then snuck into 2D and kind of bounced back and forth for a few years. In 2016, I was like firmly 2D only, just because I like to draw when I can. I became a supervisor in 2018. And then I got the chance to direct on a multimedia kids show with Global Mechanic. It was a YouTube series that had a bunch of Broadway stars like Lin-Manuel Miranda and a bunch of pop stars on it. There was Boys to Men on it. It's very cool, very chaotic with all the different live action, like collage work, harmony builds, hand drawn stuff involved. And then I went to WildBrain. I worked very briefly on the Peanut shorts, but the team was so big I probably never spoke with you, Felipe. I'm sorry. And then I got to direct at WildBrain on Lego Monkey Kids season 5. And then when the industry hurricane hit, I was able to sneak into boards and got to do some board revs on Lego Dreams and do some freelance boards. And yeah, I've been animating since like I've been purely just animating since like the beginning of 2024. And next week I start at Giant Ant on their future Tangles, which I'm very excited about.
I do love that whenever I have 4 artists chosen at random, at least 2 of them have worked together on like projects in the past or will work together on projects in the near future. It's always wild. Eden, what's your experience like with like the animation community? Like, do you find that you run into a lot of like the same faces at studios, or do you find that like at like animation events you sort of see the same people? What's your experience of like the texture of the animation community like?
So when I first started in the industry, I was in the interior of BC, not Vancouver itself. So I missed out on a lot of like the peer connections people make in college. So when I moved out here a few years later, everyone I met would be like, "What do you mean you don't know so and so?" I wasn't here. I'm sorry. But because of that, it's meant that I've kind of like with my background in doing like multiple different departments and also not being here going to college with the same people, I've had a lot more expansive like network. Like I know 3D animators, modelers, riggers, people in pipeline. In my experience, it's been very rich and diverse because I kind of make an effort to be like, what do you do? That's so cool. I don't know anything about that. Vancouver also does a pretty good job of like making events. It got a little bit difficult after the pandemic, but there's an event at the Wicklow pub every first Thursday of the month. If you want to go, there's tons of great people there. Lots of people you've probably never met before. And there's lots of people joining the industry all the time, either moving from other countries to Vancouver or they've just graduated college. And for me, it's more exciting getting to like I love meeting the people that I know, but it's also more exciting to like meet new people and see where they're at and what they're doing because it's growing and changing all the time and I'm just curious.
And you never know when you're going to bump into somebody again.
Yeah.
Lindsay, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in animation and your path to what you're currently doing?
Yeah, well, nice to see you, Mike. And I guess I've been in the animation industry for almost 15 years, I think, at this point. Again, I'm also one of these Vancouverite people. I've had to move across the country a couple of times, so I definitely understand what that feels like to new artists looking for work. And from the animation industry, I worked at all the studios here. I'm a rigging, I do harmony rigging, 2D rigging is my trade. And then from there, I started working with you at Toon Boom, and I became a senior solutions specialist, which was a fancy title for a senior trainer. And that was probably the most incredible job, was just flying around the world teaching studios how to use Toon Boom and how to use the programs in a really efficient way, and helping teams thrive in a pipeline environment. And that just became something that I love, from being a supervisor to working with Toon Boom. And then when the pandemic hit, it just changed the industry. So I think I became very curious as to what that was going to look like for artists. I had at least 10 years of experience by that time working in studio. And I really fell in love with working with interns because digitally we were all working from home, and they didn't really have a lot of exposure to like anybody else in the studio atmosphere. So I just thought, how neat would it be to create an environment where no matter where you are in the world, you can still connect with professionals and kind of get that exposure. Like I think that was probably the key thing that's missing from the animation industry now, that we probably took for granted back in the day, is when you went to work and you could see everybody's, like you could look over their shoulder and see what they're working on, and you could see how talented everybody was and what they were doing and all the other pieces in the production. And I think that that's probably the hardest part for all of us, is we really miss that exposure. And so I created an animation mentorship collective called Eat Your Peas. And our goal is, and our mission is to really create more opportunities for younger artists to connect with professional artists, and try to get that behind the curtain sneak peek of what the process is, what the procedure is, because that's how you learn animation. That's how you practice.
Yeah, I think being a trainer might be one of the coolest jobs in the animation industry because you get to go into so many different studios and talk to so many different artists and just get a feel for like how all these different productions work in a way that I don't think
Mhm.
anybody else really gets to. You mentioned that you've worked with like interns who are new to the industry. Would you say it's more challenging to work with interns, or is it more challenging to work with the artists who maybe had worked in the industry before digital tools and were then like introduced to like Toon Boom Harmony for the first time?
This is a trap. This is a trap. But the question is, what's easier?
Oh, just what did you find more
What's
challenging
the
or
difference?
interesting?
Um, there's a big difference. I think what's interesting is there's different mindsets, and interns naturally have a thriving zest and ferocious spirit to learn everything and anything, and they don't care. And I think that that's very infectious to the person who's training, no matter who you are or what you're doing, what you're training. What I like about training people who are senior is that they already have the skill, and when they click, they are thriving. And so it's a little bit different. You've got the long haul intern who's up to learning over time, and they will get there, and it's very inspiring to watch them grow. And when you're working with seniors, it's like a little bit of a different. You have to be a little bit more patient, but once it clicks, it's like they've been using the program for 5 or 10 years. So both very different experiences, both very fun. I think very different ways.
Yeah, there's definitely excitement when they realize, oh wait, I don't need to photograph these or scan these to like see the pencil test.
Mhm.
Um, so the reason why I brought you all here is to discuss practice in animation. So let's just start off by defining the term. Lindsay, how do you define practice when it comes to art and animation? And what kinds of skills are you trying to develop with practice?
That's such a good question. And it's so hard to define, I think, practice, especially in art and animation, because you have all these different streams and there's different things that you can practice. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about at Eat Your Pea is the difference between style and structure. And so a lot of people are really good at style because they're free form and they've really like honed in on what it is that they're good at, but they might be lacking structure to the underneath values. These are like intangible, invisible skills that you kind of have to poke at with a stick, and you have to repeat over and over again to get good at. That's why we practice life drawing. Um, and so it's very difficult, I think, to define practice in this realm. But I think that if you are paying attention to what you're doing and you're practicing with a purpose, you will see progress. You might not be perfect, but you'll definitely see progress, and that progress happens over time.
Sydney, what do you think of when we talk about practice in art and animation and the skills that practice is supposed to reinforce?
Um, I think it's so amorphous. Like, we were talking about how there's so many skills that go into animation. Like, animation isn't just drawing, it's like drawing and timing and gesture and structure. So to come up with like one all encompassing for practice is really difficult. I think it's just anything that like gets your hands moving, gets you creating. Um, if you are making something, especially something that like you enjoy, I think that would be a good definition for me.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point too, in that like an artist isn't just making an image, it's also all the thought and problem solving that goes into that. Philippe, what would you define as like practice in animation, and what kinds of skills do you think that are helpful to develop with practice?
Oof, yeah, that's the question, right? I like how people who teach music sometimes like to separate what is practice time and what is playing time. And there is a reason why like most of you guys mentioned how there's so much involved in what it means to do animation that I'm gonna have to repeat a little as well, because I feel like it's like an iceberg, right? Like if you ask anybody, they're gonna say drawing, but drawing is just like maybe what's in the surface, right? There's the physics, there's the acting, there's the psychology at times that you need to dive into, like what happened in the life of this character. So it's just so overwhelming to think of every single ingredient that it's involved in making like a good animation. I find for myself that the best thing I could possibly do was to separate practice from actually like performing, animating something, and separating little pieces of what a performance needs and tackling one at a time, and just like dividing small bites. We're talking about like multiple different types of very complex concepts, right? So, uh, yeah, I find very useful to just like bring to a step by step process with like little pieces of what the final puzzle is. So, like for example, like when you're performing, like I said, there's the whole mental state of the character, the whole life background that the character had to that happened before he reaches a certain point in a story. But all of that happens on top of one basic stage, which is the body mechanics. So I like to start with that, separate into smaller things, like like can I make an arm stretch and release in a solid, convincing way. So I make like little exercises so I can dominate the most basic things, and then I just add layers on top. So.
Yeah, so I remember seeing the scene that you posted a while ago about a character climbing a mountain, and then at the top, the tears well up, and also the entire time, this is a hand-drawn short that you have drawn the camera rotating around, which is insane. And also, I think the character was wearing plaid too.
Yeah.
Um, so was that like a little piece that was like just like a little like building block, or was that the sort of the performance at the end after you've practiced all of these different elements?
It was, yeah, I would say it was a combination of both. I use that exercise. I have done acting quite a few times over the years, but I never had the chance to do it in a rotating environment. So to a certain degree, that was like me practicing being able to deliver a convincing performance, which was something that I had practiced a lot in the past, and now put that into application by in an environment where the angle is changing the whole time. It was a personal challenge to not use any digital camera, so everything that happens there is just like drawing smaller, drawing bigger, in different angles. So yeah, the acting part is something that like I've exercised for years, but the challenge to me was really how to tell that story also with the camera work that involved that whole thing. The plaid
Yeah,
was
I just
just
wanted to
me
highlight
trying
like
to.
how crazy that was because I know that you're not going to brag about it yourself, so I just want to like push you towards that a little bit. Um, Eden, how would you define practice in art and animation, and what kinds of skills are you trying to develop with practice?
Um, so, like everyone else has touched on, practice is a very abstract thought, and it has to be approached differently for every person, and it will be approached differently for every department. For me, practice is kind of like embracing curiosity, looking at stuff and being like, how did they do it and why did they do it that way? And then applying it afterwards. So it's kind of like passive and active, kind of like the intentional stuff that Lindsay was talking about. And the passive stuff is a little bit of like the play that Felipe was talking about. Like I'm watching things, I'm going, how did they do that? I'm looking stuff up online. So for me, practice, the skills I'm trying to foster when I'm practicing are like investigative skills, like remaining excited and curious. And then afterwards, like there's a level of consistency that you need to like keep up to make it worthwhile, but also practicing gentleness with myself because like working full time is a lot. And sometimes I'm firmly in the passive practicing of just observing and intaking information for like months before I ever get to the active, like applied practicing, just because I have other responsibilities. But it's kind of like when I talk to newer people in the industry, I'm like, both of those are equally important. You have to find a balance that suits you best and like achieves your goals the best way possible. So when I'm trying to like get a promotion or move up in from like a supervisor to a director role, I am hyper focused on applied stuff, like getting my hands in there, figuring out how to do it to show then people that I can do it. And then when I'm just comfortably in a role, I'm just passively experiencing and investigating, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. This might bleed into the next question I'm going to ask
Oh,
you, but you mentioned that like you're watching other sort of material to try to understand like how did they do that? What choices did they make? So when you're sitting there, with the remote and you're like scrubbing through like frame by frame, what sort of things are you looking at? Like what makes you stop and go like, oh wow, how did you do that?
um, anything that gets like an immediate emotional response to me, whether it's a good or a bad one, I tend to pause and look at it and be like, oh, I didn't like that cut. And I have to go back and figure out why I didn't like it. Or, oh, I really liked that action. How did they do it? I remember there is this. I'm going to talk about anime really quick. There's this
Yes.
shot in one of the Jujutsu Kaisen like finale episodes where the big bad guy is showing off his massive amount of power, and there's this shot where someone is in uh, a skyscraper looking for him, and there's a frame where he is like a pinprick, and then there's a frame where he fills the screen, and it's like 2 frames of animation, and it scared the heck out of me. And I had to pause and look back at it and like analyze how it worked and how it didn't feel too poppy, because when I actually looked at it, there was a couple frames of him being a pinprick, like very slightly gaining speed, and then like a couple frames of him filling screen. So having that enough lead up and lead out kind of managed the pop, so you could still read what was happening, and it still had that massive impact of he is traveling so much faster than you can perceive. So that's the kind of stuff I'm looking at. When I see a bad cut, it's like, oh, that felt weird, and then I'll like analyze what made it weird, and whether they like cut in the middle of a reaction and it doesn't hook up across the scene, or it was like way too long of a pause before it cuts. And it's usually just me going like back and forth, and oftentimes discussing with other people. Like if I'm watching stuff with other people, I'll be like, why was that weird? Can we talk about that?
So kind of focus group it. No,
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, and it also kind of gets at the fact that like animation is somewhere between like a magic trick and a game of catch, where like
Yes.
the artists are throwing something at the viewer and hoping that the viewer picks up and is able to interpret what happens. So into the actual question, Eden, what is your own relationship with practice like, and what do you like to do to practice to keep your skills sharp?
My own relationship with practice is pretty rocky, just because when you work in the industry for long enough, you get really comfortable and used to making high level production things. And you're like hitting these beautiful marks of like quality. And then you go to do something on your own. You're like, I got this. It's going to be so easy. And then you try and do it. And it's really hard because the stuff you're working on at a studio has like 90 people involved. And then it's just you. And you have the like insight and the skills to know how to make this work, but there's other people doing the boards, other people doing the backgrounds, other people doing the builds, other people doing the comp, the sound, the direction sometimes. And when you have to do it yourself, it's really easy to kind of like fall into a bit of a self-pity party of like, I'm no good. So for me, practice a lot of the time is like babysitting myself, in that like tonight you gotta buckle down and you gotta do something a little bit boring, like you're gonna just draw a bunch of hands because it'll be good for you. Eat your peas, Lindsay.
That's exactly what EUP stands for.
Yeah. But then other times it's a lot of like play and like low pressure play. Like I have a dollar store sketchbook that I make the ugliest things in. I draw with Crayola markers. When I'm doing animation practice, I specifically export it at like a low quality GIF, however you want to pronounce it, just so the pressure is off. No matter what I do in this scene, no matter how rendered it is, when it comes out, it's going to be a bit crunchy. So like relax about it. I actually had a class. I speak at Capilano every once in a while. I was asked by my friend Juan to talk about how to export GIFs, because his class was learning about different types of animation, and one of the things he wanted me to talk about was why I like doing that so much. And I just like spewed my guts about how nice it is to take the pressure off and you make something ugly on purpose so that you can feel the joy of the process of making something, kind of like the play that Felipe was talking about, without the pressure of hitting some high expectation. So it's kind of like I set these parameters for myself so I can relax. And then once I build up my confidence again, and I'm like, I can't make a production by myself, but I'm still pretty good at the stuff I do, then I can kind of build something a lot nicer and more full and take my time with it without beating myself up.
Okay, I just want to go around real quick. Lindsay, 1, 2, 3, GIF or GIF?
I'm so sorry.
Yes.
Sydney, 1, 2, 3, GIF or GIF?
GIF.
Felipe, 1, 2, 3, GIF or GIF?
GIF.
Okay, we have
What's your
consensus.
opinion, Mike?
Oh, I'm definitely on Team GIF.
Okay.
Lindsay, what is your own relationship with practice like, and what do you like to do to practice to keep your skills sharp?
It's tough. I think that my relationship with practice has really changed, just because my relationship with work has really changed. I'm not working in a studio as much as I am anymore. I'll take freelance projects, but I'm not. I wouldn't say that I'm working at those speeds that I had to work at while I was working in studios. So I think my relationship with practice is really all about staying in touch with what it feels like to practice something that I'm not used to. And for me, I started surfing in Montreal. And so that is such a hard thing for me to practice. But what it's really reminds me of is every time I fall, which is every 30 seconds, I have to laugh. I remind myself that it's fun. I'm not getting hurt. There's no life-threatening situations here. And it's really about the time. I have to remind myself that it's about the time that I can put into things and like, how do I make that time for myself? And I think this is what Ian was talking about. Like, you have to put yourself in that position and babysit yourself a little bit and push yourself to get into that mindset of like, okay, I'm here to learn, I'm here to fall, I'm here to fail, but I'm here to also get back up again and to keep trying. And whether that's through playing around and turning your brain off and just doing fun things, or if you're doing something a little bit more structured where you have to repeat, repeat, repeat to get that technique and that fine tuning, you kind of have to practice jumping around and staying in that framing and that mindset of like growth beginner's mindset. So that's what I practice. I'm not practicing surfing, but I'm practicing being active and making sure I spend a couple hours a day either walking the dog, which is natural, but I started going to the gym. So I practice going to the gym.
We've been having this discussion for a little bit over 20 minutes, actually 30 minutes now. So I'd encourage everybody to just stop staring at the screen for like 20 seconds, look at something 20 feet away, and then look back. Um,
Yes, that's wellness right there.
just a basic thing, because you have to remember, like, even when you're working on projects, you still are a person, and you don't want to hurt yourself while you're working.
Once you become a
Sydney,
professional, that's very important.
yeah, you are an art athlete, and your hands are very important. Sydney, what's your own relationship with practice like, and what do you like to do to practice to keep your skills sharp?
So I came into this thinking like I'm so in practice because like I've been working like semi consistently for the past couple of years, but now I'm hearing people be like, I practice outside of work, and I'm like, oh no, oh no. Not that I don't practice, like don't do art on my own and stuff, but yeah, I was thinking of kind of my I guess like my practice, my what I do for work being part of that practice. But like further, outside of the stuff I get paid to do, um, I really like to take um, like something that I've never done before or something that I'm interested in figuring out more about, and then something that I really feel comfortable with or something that I really like, and like mushing those two things together. So there's like it's like a spoonful of sugar, making the medicine go down. Um, so like a lot of my practice when I first got out of college was really into I was really into a web comic, and I would do lots of like little experimental animations or comics or illustrations, and play with the balance between a lot of the stuff that I do is like character based. So like my practice specifically is like taking a look at anatomy and gesture and then making those two things either fight it out or like leaning more heavily into one or the other, seeing how I can get them to like coexist peacefully. So yeah, lots of experimenting, trying new things. That's kind of how I approach practice outside of my day job.
Yeah, you mentioned like, looking at like gesture anatomy. Where do you go to practice like gesture drawings?
So very out of practice with gesture drawing also. But for a little while, I was actually teaching a really cool class where it was like, I think it was like a 6-hour long class. There was a little break in the middle, like for lunch and stuff. It was pretty humane. Some of my students might have disagreed, but also I didn't come up with the structure of the class. So, but it was like a 6-hour gesture drawing class. And for the first half, we would do like studies based off of what was that one website? It's Line of Action, I think is what it was. Yeah. I'm seeing head nods. We know Line of Action. So we would go on like Line of Action. We would pull up, models and gesture draw from those on like a timed, really quick, like 30 seconds sometimes, just like get the gesture down as fast as possible. But then in the afternoons, a lot of times we would have like live animals and people come in and we would do drawings from life, which is very, very important. Seeing something in like 3D in real life activates like those different parts of your brain than just staring at a screen. And then we would also do like field trips there's a really big, like I think one of the like bigger zoos in the country. We would go visit the zoo. There was like a petting zoo kind of place that we would go to, just all sorts of an acrobatics class that would let us sit in, like all sorts of wild stuff. And then also like, since that's not that was a very, very cool like opportunity that I had, and a very specific opportunity. We also talked about like ways that you can take that like life drawing and gesture drawing practice with you after the class. So we would do like coffee shops. We just go to coffee shops and sit and like creep on people and draw them. Obviously, like if someone was like, "Hey, whoa, what are you doing?" we would stop. But like generally we would, just look at our surroundings, the people around us, and try to like catch them in action, doing their little coffee shop thing, drinking tea. I don't know. Yeah.
I have to say, I'm super jealous, and I want to take this class now. That sounds amazing.
It
The
was
second
really,
thing is, I
really
could only
cool.
imagine if I was at like a coffee shop and there were like 20 animation students drawing me as I'm Cookie Monstering something like that.
Yeah, luckily there was also this like food market we would go to that had like an upper level. So we could kind of like look down, which was also great for perspective. But yeah, we would try to, it was a smaller class, but we would also try to preach like, be subtle. Don't be staring at someone for 30 minutes. That's also why we would practice like the fast, not why we would practice the fast drawing, but it was like 30-second sketches were kind of the name of the game. So hopefully you don't creep someone out in 30 seconds. Maybe.
I think that is so cool. Felipe, what is your own relationship with practice like, and what do you like to do to practice to keep your own skills sharp?
Bumpy, like most people, I would say that's my relationship with practice. Like, seeing you guys talking about like gesturing drawing, that's actually something that I have as a goal for this year and the future, because like technically I've never had drawing lessons ever in my life for many reasons. So uh yeah, if one of those like subtle coffee shop sessions are happening in Vancouver, please invite me, and I would like to join. But uh for a long time in my early days in animation, because I didn't have access to guidance, I had to find my own ways to deal with like the skills I wanted to learn. Like I said, like even though I was working with projects that are based on like harmony builds for a long time, traditional animation was really the focus of my personal study. So for a long time, my study sessions were basically looking online, trying to find uh, entire sequence of old scenes from Disney movies, and I would whatever had a good enough quality where like I had enough drawings there and I could see enough of the time charts I would download those, import into Toon Boom with no with a transparent background, meaning I could use the onion skin, and I would just like in between everything. So I used to go to Andrea Deja's website all the time because he has tons of like high quality material like that. So I would just try to understand how like those people at that time uh, plan their work. How they deal with spacing, how they deal with performance, how they express certain things graphically, like a perspective in a hand in a weird breakdown, and I would just try to read in between in a way that it worked. I did that for a long time, on and off. Of course, once you join the industry, I guess like you have the benefit of having so many good artists like around you to like try to be a little sponge. Uh, I've struggled for a long time with like producing personal work, uh, because I'm not naturally a character designer. Like the motion and performance part of the job is the thing that like I feel more natural towards to. So every time I had to like create something for myself as a practice routine, I would get stuck in the character design part of it, because especially with traditional animation, if I don't have a character, like what am I animating, right? So my way to find a solution for that struggle, again, not having like a specific guidance, was just going back to Disney movies as well. And I remember in every making of, I would see like supervisors saying that like they designed the character, then they spend an entire year doing animation tests, and the motion and the way that the character performs in space would uh, show different needs for the design. So the character design at the end of the day would change to benefit what was needed for that character to move in space. So I changed my approach to develop personal little shots, to basically just not worry about character design. I'll do a very rough uh, silhouette of a character, just thinking shapes. Then I start animating very loose, no details, and then by the end of a couple days, the motion tells me what the design needs to be, and that led me to be able to practice more. So uh, uh, that's how I end up with the character spinning around with a plaid shirt. Yeah, I guess like
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Oh
I
no,
do
go
think
ahead.
it's interesting because you mentioned that like you have in your day-to-day work, right? You're doing and specializing like this one particular part of the animation pipeline, right? You're really good at that area, and then suddenly, like when you start branching out, like okay, well, I need to do some character design for this character. You realize like that's also a full-time job that
Yeah.
someone has dedicated like years of their life to perfecting.
Mhm.
Oh
And I
yeah,
just
for
think it's very
sure.
interesting.
And yeah,
Um, Philip, I wanted to ask you, like, have you encountered misconceptions about practice, and is it possible to practice in ways that aren't helpful?
I would say any practice is better than no practice, but I think we're all like haunted by the ghost of, is looking for reference, am I cheating, uh, is it like drawing on top of the model sheet, is that allowed, and I think like from time to time we all need to remember that, there's no cheat. You're just like, it's only a matter of like preparing yourself as much as you can to perform. So if you can surround yourself with enough useful tools, like finding the right type of reference, how you bring the best out of a reference into your scene, uh, and using the tools, like we just talked really quick about character design. Like people spend like months developing bibles of like how the hands of the characters should be in a certain angle, multiple turnarounds of the character, how it works, like how the face works in different perspectives. That's there for a reason. So I think maybe if I could point something out as I'm misunderstanding about like the path to be successful animating something. It would be like not think that you, or like believing that you're not allowed to use those things, or if you're using, you're cheating. It's just
Right, right. Because I
preparation.
mean, on a production, you need to use reference material
Yeah.
and the model sheets. That's not only helpful; it is like the job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eden, have you encountered misconceptions about practice, and do you feel it's possible to practice in ways that might not be as helpful?
Um, Misconceptions about practice. I have found the biggest misconception, and this is again going to be different for lots of people, but I find a lot of people push themselves into a corner that they don't want to be in. Like for a really long time, I thought that like I should practice how to digitally paint because that's what real artists do. And there's a lot of beautiful digital painters out there, but I found that no matter how often I practiced or if I found an amount of joy in it, it felt more like homework that I dreaded doing. And I often didn't get much joy. I would end up frustrated. And even if I made something good and I solved a problem and figured out a technique, it just wasn't really for me. Like every once in a while, I'll dip my toe back in digital painting because when I'm feeling it, it's fun. But I kind of like realized that what I like to do is like I'm more of a line work kind of guy. I like to I'm more draftsman heavy, and forcing myself into a corner that I don't even want to be in for like my career and I'm not finding joy in. It was like I'm trying to impress people who don't necessarily care about that, like people who don't even exist. So why am I doing that? Why am I hurting myself that way? And that's one way to practice in a way that's not helpful. But also, I think, like I mentioned before, there's like the passive and active practicing. There are times where I become so like obsessed with getting better that I end up hurting myself. Like you were mentioning before about being like athletes who are artists, like you have to take care of yourself. You have to remember to drink water. You have to remember to rest. And there have been times in my career, more early on than now, where it would be like, I'm so invested in practicing and getting better because I'm very ambitious and I want to hit a certain mark, that things were getting harder because I wasn't taking care of myself and I wasn't resting and eating properly. So when I would practice, it was way harder for things to come, not naturally, but like come to me, for me to make sense of them because my brain was foggy. I was exhausted. And I find that sometimes it's important to take a break. And like I mentioned before, sometimes my breaks are months long. And that's good for me in my roles and my ambitions in my career. But I do find a lot of people, especially earlier in their career, are like, I want to work at the big name studios and I'm going to hurt myself drastically and it'll all be worth it in the end. And it's like, you probably still won't be noticed by the big name studio and you'll come out burnt out and kind of like mentally mangled, and your work wouldn't be as strong if you took a more measured approach.
Yeah. Also, to what you said earlier too about like not enjoying digital paint, even though you felt like it's something that you really wanted to improve on. I think also being like aware of like what your goals are and
Yeah.
like what you're trying to improve on is also helpful.
Hmm.
Because you know what helps one person might not help someone else.
Exactly. You should find what works, what you want out of life, not what some amorphous like legion online is what you think they're telling you. They don't exist. It's not real.
Lindsay, have you encountered misconceptions about practice, and do you feel it's possible to practice in ways that aren't as helpful?
I love this question. It's another trap. There are so many ways that you could practice and not get better. I think the first thing is if you are constantly doing the same thing, or you're not really paying attention to what you're doing. That is probably the biggest way that people can waste a lot of time practicing, because they're not making gains, they're not getting better. If they're not getting feedback, if they're not showing their work to other people, that's a huge one. You really need to have that outside influence so that you know like what other people's general reactions are to your work and the why, which can be harder to get. The other thing is impatience. I think a lot of people get impatient with their results. They're not happy with what they're producing, which can become very frustrating, and that will shut a lot of opportunities to people. Um, and then I think my favorite thing that I learned as a Toon Boom trainer through experience, I didn't really like notice this at first, but I do believe the best way for people to practice is really to also teach. Because when you're teaching, you're learning a language. And so whether you're learning how to set up a deformer, how to create a new drawing, how to add a drawing to a network view, it doesn't really matter. If you're learning that, if you can actually practice teaching somebody who's struggling with it, that really sets you up for success a lot faster. That's probably how you practice the fastest, but that's definitely not something that will come to mind. So that's, to me, that's the biggest misconception about learning a skill, is teaching it.
Yeah, oh, I mean, I think Eden mentioned earlier that like on a production you could be working with like 90 other artists, and
Hmm.
communication skills are really important, you know, because I think it's really easy. There are a lot of times where like an artist can do something, but then not tell you in words like how that works, and there's a language for it, you know, like there's value and uh hue and like line quality and all these terms we use to describe things. But if you don't have the experience talking about it, it can make it difficult to work in a collaborate in a group environment to give people feedback.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Sydney, I want to ask you if you've encountered misconceptions about practice and if it's possible to practice in ways that might not be as helpful.
This probably comes from like my somewhat sloppy relationship with practice, but I think like as long as you are actually creating something, like it's kind of hard to practice wrong. Personally, like in my experience, but I think that again like comes from my own personal like I'll get into the mindset where I'm like so caught up on making something perfect or like even just good that I put things down and I don't pick them back up forever, you know? So I think like as long as you're getting over that first hurdle of like it doesn't have to be good, it just has to be done. I just have to like put it out into the world or get it like out of my head. I think that's, you know, you're doing better than I have in the past. So
Okay, we have about like 5 minutes left, so I want to do like a really quick lightning round. Um, Sydney, do you have one piece of advice for artists who are offering critiques?
be open and listen.
All right, Felipe, what's your one piece of advice for artists offering critiques?
Be clear about what is an objective feedback and what is personal preference. Sometimes those two can be entangled together and becomes confusing.
I like that one. Eden, what is your one piece of advice for artists offering critiques?
Go on YouTube, look up Script Notes, which is one word, and then 399. It's a podcast about screenwriting, but this one episode is about writers talking with creative executives on how to give notes properly. And it is the most world changing thing that happened that I listened to when I got into directing. It's really good.
I just wrote that down. Um, Lindsay, do you have advice for artists that are offering critiques?
I really like what Felipe said. You have to keep the personal opinion aside and really focus on that overview of the feedback and the critique, and not the minuscule details. You really have to like remove yourself from that.
All right, we're approaching the end of the hour, so I'm going to ask my most important question. Lindsay, where can our viewers go to see more of your work?
Well, you can join my Discord, the Discord community, Eat Your Peas. You can also follow us on Instagram, Eat Your Peas at AMC. I don't really have a lot of personal work out there. It's really all going into the projects that we're working on, which will be coming out this year. So to be the first one to know about those, you'll have to follow along on one of those social media sites.
Search for Eat Your Peas until you see cartoon peas, and then you found the project.
You found it.
Sydney, where can our viewers go to see more of your work?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm at Sydney Gale on like most platforms, even the dead and dying ones. Tumblr, Vimeo, Instagram. Instagram is like my big one, I think. Although I'm more lurking on there than anything these days. Oops. Yeah, at Sydney Gale. Hit me up.
Remember when Vimeo was like the cool YouTube?
I invested so
fun.
much time. Yeah. And now it's, I don't know. Yep.
Felipe, where can our viewers go to see more of your work?
Primarily Instagram at Felipe Animation. It's Felipe A. dot animation, a very poorly placed dot. Everybody thinks my name is Felipe A, but it's not. So yeah, Instagram and Patreon. Spooky Files is the name of my Patreon. So
Yeah, I think one cool thing too is that like you actually share the project files that you work on, so people can download them and like learn from them, which I just think is really cool.
that's true. Yeah, I forgot I had a Gumroad store as well. Yeah, I try to uh, drop my Harmony files from personal projects, so you don't have to spend time finding stuff online to then import and read in between like I did.
Yeah, because I think a lot of artists can find like 2D rigs, but it's harder to find like 2D hand-drawn animated scenes and like see how like artists work in like an actual working file. Really cool. Eden, where can reviewers go to see more of Eden Tim?
I think I'm the only Eden Tim on the planet, so I'm very easy to find. I'm on all social media platforms, but I'm probably most active on Blue Sky right now, and then Instagram would be second. And I'm trying really hard to get back into Tumblr because I miss the jokes.
Tumblr was really cool. All right.
It was.
Thank you, Sydney, Felipe, Eden, and Lindsay for taking time to discuss how practice fits into animation. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. If you're interested in improving your skills, you can find our instructor-led training courses at toonboom.com/training. We offer courses on how to use Storyboard Pro and Harmony in a production setting, as well as courses to improve your skills when rigging, compositing, and animating for 2D games. So thank you all for joining us, and be sure to tune in next time.